well on this spring-ish suddenly evening. Nice to see all of you here. And before I tell you a little bit about our lecture this evening and our visiting lecturer, I want to use the opportunity to do a few announcements for the program. My name is Alana Cooper. I direct Jewish Lifelong Learning at Case Western Reserve University. I hope that you've gotten our literature in the mail. If not, we've got all kinds of stuff out front. Please take as much as you can. Help yourself on your way out. Our catalogs came out about a month ago. Our brochures are out pretty new, our Jewish Studies brochures. Make sure you take one so you'll have a sense of what we've got going on here. I'll just pull out one or two highlights for you. One program which is near and dear to my heart, I started about a year ago with our executive director, Brian Amkraut, called Tribe Talk, New Jewish Conversations. It's a really fun, lively way to engage with the news and looking at the news really from a Jewish angle, seeing the way what's going on in the world affects the Jewish community both nationally and locally. And it's a fun conversation. It's an hour once a month. Please come join us. Our next Tribe Talk is Monday night exactly at this time. I hope to see you there. And I also want to tell you about another program that we have here called Jewish Boot Camp. Jewish Boot Camp is a series of courses that are intended as sort of introductory, quick overview courses for people either that need a refresher, that need some background information. We do Jewish history courses, courses on Jewish traditions. I'm a cultural anthropologist, and I run a boot camp course that gives you an overview of the way Jews have celebrated and marked the calendar across time and different parts of the Jewish world. And my class is not beginning until March, but keep it in mind. And lastly, I just want to draw your attention to our postcard up here, which has our upcoming visiting scholars. We're on number 2 here with Professor Matt Goldish, and our next one is about a month from this evening. And I hope that you'll be able to take part. And Cheryl is reminding me to make an announcement for those of you that need the bathroom. It's on the 2nd floor. Feel free to go. No one has to raise their hand and take a pass. But I do want to let you know that the women's bathroom needs a key for the 2nd floor, and the keys are out there. So please take. Okay, with that, I want to turn my attention to the evening at hand, to our lecture at hand, and begin by thanking the David and Robert Stein Family Foundation. We're really grateful for the foundation's support of our lecture this evening. We have Carol Stein here, waving her hand, along with Deborah and Joel Glass, who are here representing the family this evening. And this lecture is in memory of Paul Stein and Robert Stein, and we're really honored that you've decided to host the lecture in their memory, and may their memories be for a blessing. I'm going to turn my attention now to our speaker, Professor Matt Goldish. We're thrilled to have you here from Columbus. Professor Goldish holds the Samuel M. and Esther Melton Chair in Jewish History at Ohio State University, where he's been since 1999. He holds a BA from the University of California in Los Angeles and his PhD from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. His areas of research and interest include topics of messianism, which is obviously related to his talk this evening, Jewish-Christian intellectual relations, and Sephardi studies. Professor Goldish is widely published. Among his many publications, I'll read a couple of the book titles that he's put out: Judaism in the Theology of Sir Isaac Newton, The Sabbatean Prophets, and Jewish Questions, Responsa on Jewish Life in the Early Modern Period. We're really thrilled to have you here and honored that you're with us. Please give Professor Goldish a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I am honored and thrilled to be here. If my there's my talk. I'd like to thank my friend Jonathan Hartstein, who came all the way from Columbus to hear me. Bichlod Achsanya, in honor of my hosts, I want to thank Alana for inviting me, to the whole Siegal College and Case Western Reserve group for inviting me, and thanks to the David and Roberta Stein Family Foundation for sponsoring this event. So the title of this talk is given out as A Jewish Messiah, Tale of a Convincing Imposter, 1666. I don't recall inventing that title, so I'm not sure whose idea that was, but I'll tell you what I wonder about it. So I'm not sure why a Jewish Messiah who fails to deliver salvation to the Jewish people, or at least fails for the time being, would necessarily be an imposter. We think of an imposter as someone who pretends to be one thing and is not really that thing, and knows he or she is not that thing. But a Jewish Messiah is generally no imposter from that perspective. But we'll return to that issue, I think. So I don't know about the imposter part. My talk will cover three main areas, or at least however much of it I get to in the time allotted. I want to make some general remarks about Jewish messiahs and messianism. I want to talk about this particular character who is the subject of tonight, Shabbatai Zevi, and his movement, which is referred to as Sabbatinism or Shabtaut in the 17th century, and discussion, the third part, if I get to it, a discussion about the theories about why this movement was so successful. And in many ways, that's really the question that I think people would have as we learn about this 17th century movement, maybe the biggest Jewish messianic movement ever. Why? Why was it so successful? Why were people prepared to believe that this particular person was the Messiah? So I hope to get to that point. So just in general about Jewish messiahs and messianism. Here's my first thought. Do you ever have this thing where you find the missing sock from your favorite, your favorite pair of socks, right? The ones with the little reindeer on them or whatever, yeah, right? And you lose one of them, and you find the missing sock, and it's stuck under the dryer or in a crumpled corner of a sheet somewhere, and you find it, you're very excited. You know that thing? Do you know why you found that sock? You found that sock because you were looking for it. Jews find the Messiah because they are looking for the Messiah. And that is my first point. The Jewish people have messianic movements and episodes of high messianic excitement because they are looking for the Messiah. They look for him, so they find him. We know that Maimonides, the great medieval Jewish philosopher, formulated principles of the Jewish faith. And one of those principles is about the Messiah, right? Ani ma'amin be'amuna shlema beviat HaMashiach v'af al pi she'yitma'amea, right? I believe, right? This is one of Maimonides' 13 principles of Jewish faith. I believe with perfect faith in the coming of the Messiah, and even though he may tarry, I will wait for him. So Jews were always looking for the Messiah and expecting the Messiah. So, what is a Messiah? In the Hebrew Bible, there are three kinds of people who were anointed with a special holy anointing oil. Anointing is one of those things that's sort of passed away from modern life. I don't know about you. I don't know anybody who's sort of a regular anointer. And you come out of the shower and you pour the oil over your, I don't know, some of the hair cream maybe. But this was a thing in the ancient world, anointing oneself. And so there was a special kind of anointing oil which indicated somebody was appointed to a position of leadership. So the three kinds of people who would be anointed with the special oil were prophets, kings, and priests, Kohanim, especially the Kohen Gadol. Those were the three types of people who were anointed with a special oil. Anointing in Hebrew is meshicha, right? So somebody who was anointed with a special oil was called a mashuach or a mashiach, a Messiah, right? That's where the word comes from. Those are the three types of people in the Bible who would be anointed with the special oil of anointing for leadership. So making a very long story much shorter than it should be, I'll just say that in the period of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, that is to say, right, you remember that Solomon's temple was destroyed and the Hebrew people went into exile and they came back and rebuilt it. So that's called the Second Temple period, runs from roughly 500 BCE, never tell my rabbi that you heard me say that, and till 70 of the Common Era. Very good. Uh-oh, I got experts here. I better be careful. Right. That's right. So during that period, the idea of the Mashiach, of the Messiah, metamorphosed, especially under the impact of the Romans. The problem with the Romans is, you invite them over for a visit and you just can't get rid of them. And that's what happened in Judea in the Second Jewish Commonwealth. And as the Romans choked off Jewish sovereignty more and more, there became more and more of a sense that we need to be freed of them. We need to be saved from them. And ultimately, the idea of the Mashiach, of a Mashuach, right, this special anointed person would be this sort of waiting for a Jewish king to come along and presumably militarily throw off the yoke of the Romans and return the temple and the land of Israel to Jewish control. So that became the sort of it pushed out other ideas of anointed leaders, and that became the idea that we call the idea of the Mashiach, or the Messiah. So we know about any number of Jewish figures who arose during the late Second Temple period and claimed to be the Messiah, or had followers who made that claim of them. These included a person named Shimon of Gishal or Gush Chalav, Athrongis, which was some strange Latin form or Greek form of etrog, and a guy named Yeshua of Notzrat. This later figure was not originally very successful, but under the influence of the genius publicist Shaul of Tarshish, he turned this originally small movement into one of the most successful Jewish messianic movements in history. This movement, this Jesus of Nazareth and Paul of Tarsus, I'm told that it was so successful that there are remnants of it still around 2,000 years later. So keep your eye out for that. Since that time and until our very days, there have been Jewish messianic pretenders. There have been people who have come forward and presented themselves as the Mashiach, or other people have come forward and claimed that a certain person was the Mashiach, was the Messiah. I think maybe most familiar today, most recent, was the late Lubavitcher Rebbe. And I think that we all probably know people who still think that he's the Messiah. Being dead, by the way, is not a problem. Okay. Some of these figures, and they have appeared regularly throughout Jewish history. If you're interested in a sort of history of this, my friend Harris Lenowitz wrote a book called The Jewish Messiahs, published by Oxford University Press, in which he sort of goes through the whole history of these figures. So some of these figures have a military approach, planning to redeem the Jewish people by force. Others, following the novelty of Jesus, promise a spiritual redemption of the soul rather than a physical redemption. And there are Jewish mystical messiahs who expect to redeem the Jews through sublime mystical experiences and techniques. So, in fact, although we tend to hear about a very specific version of the Messiah idea, there really is a fair amount of difference and variations on what this might be in the Jewish sources of the last 2,000 years. Okay, so what about our guy, Shabbatai Zevi? The year 1648 was a year for which a number of people had predicted the Messiah to come, and this was always a project, predicting when the Messiah will come. If you think that people aren't doing this anymore, look, if your next door neighbor isn't doing it, the guy 2 doors down is doing it. There are still, among Christians, this is a cottage industry trying to figure out when the second coming, in their case, will occur. But 1648 had been a very popular year among predictors. It ended up being an absolutely awful year for the Ashkenazi Jews. It was the year of what's called the Khmelnytsky uprising in the Ukraine and spilling over into Poland, and Jewish communities were decimated there. Really a horrible, horrible time for Ashkenazi Jews. As it turns out, it was actually a pretty good year for Sephardi Jews, for Italian Jews, for Jews in other parts of the world. They, I'm sure, were very sad about what was going on in Poland, but it wasn't affecting them particularly. That was the year in 1648 that a 22-year-old yeshiva student in the Ottoman port city of Izmir first told a few friends that he was certain that God had sent him as the Messiah to redeem the Jewish people. Some of them scoffed at him, some of them believed him. I have to imagine, remembering myself as a 22-year-old, that some of them probably picked up and moved to the other side of the lunchroom so as not to be too close to him. But at the time, the matter really didn't go any further, and this student, Shabbatai Zevi, returned to his labors studying the Talmud and the mystical Kabbalah. But over subsequent years, Shabbatai and a few of his followers continued their sort of activities in this vein, and they were banished from Izmir, later from Saloniki. I'm not sure how much of it had to do with their messianic expectations and how much of it had to do with just strange things that they did. At one point, this Shabbatai Zevi calls the community, I think this is when he was still in Izmir, he calls the community together for his wedding. He's a significant Talmid Chacham, a scholar. Everybody comes out for his wedding, and he declares that he is having himself married to a Torah scroll, a Sefer Torah. Little odd, and he gets thrown out of Izmir. And later he's in Saloniki, Ir ve'em b'Yisrael, Saloniki, Salonika, a great city of Jewish scholars. And people spot Shabbatai Zevi, this impressive Talmudic and Kabbalistic scholar, walking around pushing a stroller, which upon closer examination turns out to have inside of it a large fish, which he has some Kabbalistic explanation about why this is important to do and so on. And he gets put in cherem. He's kicked out of Salonika as well. So he has some strange activities which may have more to do with his exclusion from communities than his messianic pretensions. As the great scholar of Jewish mysticism, Gershom Scholem, explains, Shabbatai was at this point showing the first symptoms of what would become a full-blown manic depressive or bipolar syndrome. And Scholem meticulously traces Shabbatai's manic and depressive phases over years of his life. And Scholem, who wrote a 1,000-page book about this movement, has been criticized for various things by various people, including me. But this is one area where I think scholars have not tried to criticize him, and that's fairly amazing because psychohistory, trying to study the psychology of somebody who's dead, is a very tricky business, and he did it so impressively that people have not really doubted this, that Shabbatai Zevi was seriously bipolar, and some of these strange activities had to do with that. Okay. In 1665, apparently in an extended period of calm, Shabbatai was living in Jerusalem, studying at the yeshiva of the great Rabbi Yaakov Hajiz, when he was called upon by the city's leadership to go on a desperately needed fundraising mission to the leader of Egyptian Jewry, a man named Raphael Joseph Chelebi. Chelebi was a title. He was the leader of that Jewish community. So if you sometimes see these people from Israel, these men coming to collect money here in Cleveland, just know that that is a tradition going back many hundreds of years, because apparently the communities in the land of Israel were always on the edge of insolvency. So this Raphael Joseph Chelebi was very much taken with Shabbatai Zevi, who had a very magnetic personality, and he supported him and had him living at his home for a period of some months. Around this time, it seems that Shabbatai sort of reverted to his manic phase and started having these visions or these dreams of himself as the Messiah again. And somebody, perhaps it was Raphael Yosef Chelebi, told him that maybe what he ought to do is go see a Kabbalist. Now, you see, today, if you feel that you are having some kind of personality or problems in your life, you go to a psychologist. In the 17th century, you went to a Kabbalist, right? A doctor of the soul. And what they would do for you is what's called a tikkun. They would give you, right, they would look into your soul and they would tell you what's wrong with you and what you should do about it. And that's what you would presumably do. So he was told about a figure of this type, a great Kabbalist living in the city of Gaza. And in Gaza, there was a man named Nathan Ashkenazi, who was all of 22 years old, again at this time, 22, world famous already for being a great seer and Kabbalist. And Shabbatai Zevi was recommended to go talk to him, so he goes to talk to him in Gaza. Now, I assume, and there's reason to assume, that what Shabbatai expected was that Nathan of Gaza would look at him and listen to his story and tell him to stop eating the 24-inch pizzas before dinner, before going to bed, and he'd stop having crazy dreams and visions and so on. Right? You expect a tikkun, some kind of right, he's going to tell him what to do about these strange ideas he has about being the Messiah. But what happens is Shabbatai goes to Nathan of Gaza. Nathan of Gaza looks at him and he says, "You're the Messiah. You're it. It's you. You're right. You're not just having visions. It really is you." And he says, "I saw you in a dream that I had, and I know that it's you." And Shabbatai doesn't seem to be convinced at first. He really doesn't think that this could be true. But Nathan of Gaza seems to sort of talk him into it. So it's a strange relationship between these two. And both of them, sort of like Jesus and Paul of Tarsus in certain ways, right? Both of them really need to come together to make this movement get off the ground. But they do. And it's Shavuot night in the year 1665 in Gaza. And it turns out that Gaza on Shavuot night is a hot ticket. There are rabbis from all over the place who come to be with the great Nathan of Gaza and with his magnetic friend Shabbatai Zevi for Shavuot. And as you know, the tradition on Shavuot night is that people stay up all night and learn. And Nathan of Gaza and his group are in their Beit Midrash, their study hall, and they're staying up and they're studying and they're singing and they're eating, and I don't know whether controlled substances are involved or not. I really have no way of knowing, but the long and short of it is that Nathan of Gaza experiences a very public and very dramatic spirit possession episode in which something called a Magid, which is a heavenly mentor or spirit, comes and speaks out of his mouth in a manner exactly replicating something that happened to the great Rabbi Joseph Caro 100 years earlier, which I won't get into. But the Spirit speaking out of Nathan's mouth says, Shabbatai Zevi is the Messiah. He is it. Go and tell the world. And you can imagine that when Shavuot is over, these rabbis from all over the place are absolutely staggered. They're flabbergasted. And I won't go into what all the dramatics of this event were, but it was very dramatic. And they do exactly that. They go and start telling people. And these are rabbis who came from all over, and they go back to their homes, and some of them are traveling. They go, and wherever they go, they tell about what they saw, and it spreads like wildfire. Meanwhile, Shabbatai Zevi is traveling. I'll talk about that in a minute. And Nathan of Gaza sits down with his pen, and he starts writing these, what you call a circular letter, right? A letter that's meant to be circulated among many people. And he sends them all over the place in the Ottoman Empire, in Western Europe, Amsterdam, Germany, right? About here is what's about to happen. The Messiah has arrived, and here is what's going to happen over the coming months. By the way, I don't think a single thing that he said in that letter actually happened, but by the time people realized that it hadn't happened, they weren't paying attention to the letter anymore. The movement was just a rolling snowball that just picked up steam. Wherever the rabbis went who had witnessed this event in Gaza, right, as they told their stories and they told about what happened to Nathan, the strangest thing starts happening. There is a mass prophetic movement of ordinary Jews, men and women and children, scholars and ignoramuses, who start falling on the ground or contorting into all kinds of crazy positions and uttering prophecies. And as will not surprise you, I'm sure, the sort of gist of these prophecies from all over the place is that the Mashiach has arrived, and it is Shabbatai Zevi. I am convinced that this is probably one of the major reasons that people were convinced by this movement, because these prophecies, again, like that of Nathan of Gaza, very dramatic, very sort of immediate, and right in front of your face, people that you know prophesying in this intense way, and the movement spread all over the place. So Shabbatai heads for Izmir, for his hometown. He goes to Izmir, and then he goes toward Constantinople. I know what you're going to tell me. You're going to tell me, Matt, it's not called Constantinople at this point. It's called Istanbul. I heard the song too. But the Jews keep calling it Constantinople all the way through this period, all the way through the Ottoman period. They keep calling it Kushta or Constantinople. Anyway, he heads there, and before he can even land, he is clapped in chains by the Ottoman government and hauled up in front of the divan, in front of the Sultan's number 2 figure, and he is accused of being a danger to the government. All the crazy Jews are just going nuts over this guy. Let's see what it is. And they put him in jail. But you see, the thing about Ottoman jails is that the jailers are terribly underpaid. And what that means is that for a few bucks in the right hands, your jail sentence can become much more pleasant than it would otherwise have been. So the Jews pay off the jailers, and Shabbatai's prison suddenly turns into a reception center. And Jews from all over the world come to see the Messiah. They come to visit Shabbatai. They come to bring him gifts. He receives them in his lovely quarters. And I think that some of the guards became sort of believers also as they watched this going on. And it was a circus, right, from the Ottoman point of view. Anyway, but this was all going on. And the Jews are looking at this and they're saying, if I wondered before, if I had any question before about whether this guy's really the Messiah, look at this. Look at this. The Ottomans are standing back, and he, after being hauled in front of the vizier, he's holding court. He must be the Messiah. What else could explain this? And there's lots more, as I mentioned, right? There's a 1,000-page book about this. My book is much more modest. I don't know what it is, 250 pages or something. So, depending on how much time you have to invest in this movement, lots of details that I'm sort of skipping over or going on. But eventually, here's what happens, is that a Polish Jew named Nehemiah Cohen comes to visit Shabbatai and sort of check him out. Now, this Nehemiah Cohen has his own messianic pretensions, right? It shouldn't be a surprise that there are two guys in the world at the same time who think that they're Messiah. Fortunately, there's a great Jewish tradition that there will be two Messiahs, so everybody, you would think, could play together in the same sandbox. But it doesn't work out this way. So Nehemiah Cohen comes from Poland, and he comes to Shabbatai, and they closet themselves for several days for intense messianic conversations, and apparently they just couldn't work it out, because this Nehemiah Cohen comes out of his long meeting with Shabbatai, and he does a quick pro forma conversion to Islam, which it turns out takes about 10 seconds. If you know about Islam, it is extremely easy to convert. He converts. He goes in front of the Muslim court and gives testimony against Shabbatai Zevi, that he's a danger to the government and all kinds of things like that. And then he heads back to Poland, where he stops being a Muslim, amazingly enough, and goes back to his regularly scheduled Jewish life. Shabbatai Zevi is hauled back in front of the vizier, and this time it's curtains for him, right? This time there's no quick getting out of it, and he is about to be beheaded. Now, those of you who are familiar with our friends and neighbors, the Christians, know what happens when you kill the Messiah. He doesn't go away, right? Like Obi-Wan Kenobi, he cut off his head, but he becomes stronger than he was before. So what would have happened if Shabbatai Zevi had actually been killed on the spot? We'd probably have Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and Sabbateanism. It would probably have spun out into its own religion, waiting for Shabbatai Zevi to come back. Enough of that happened even without, but that's not what ended up happening. He did the strangest thing for a Messiah, right? If you read about enough of these messianic figures, you learn the mindset is, the sort of Thelma and Louise thing. Maybe you noticed that I like movies. I'm sorry. Anyway, you just head off the cliff. Like I'm going all the way with the Messiah thing. He didn't do that. Somebody told him maybe if he converts to Islam, he can save himself. And he did. He converted to Islam. And the Sultan gave him a nice position as a guard of the gates. It was just a ceremonial position, and gave him a stipend and bundled him off somewhere. And you would think that would be the end of the story. That's it. I mean, he did many strange things, this man, and broke many commandments publicly. He used to break the Jewish commandments. And here, if you know the blessings you say in the morning, right, the Jewish blessings you say in the morning, one of them is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim, right? Thank you, God, Lord of the universe, who frees prisoners. With a very slight tweak to that blessing, it turns into matir isurim, right? Thank you, God, who permits the forbidden. And he would make that blessing, and he would eat forbidden food publicly in front of everybody, and he would give these messianic, Kabbalistic explanations. It's very hard to explain this, but people accepted this, that there were specific reasons that he had to break the commandments having to do with the coming of the messianic age. And he would do all kinds of strange things. So you would think that you couldn't have a commandment-breaking Jewish Messiah, but you did. A commandment-breaking Jewish Messiah. Now, he's a commandment-breaking Muslim Jewish Messiah. You would think that that would really do him in. I mean, he's breaking commandments and he's a Muslim. How's he going to be the Jewish Messiah? But he still has, even after this, an enormous following of people who, for various, again, Kabbalistic explanations, think that he had to do this, and this is part of the fulfillment of a prophecy from the books of prophets, that he had to do this, and he continues to have a large following. Even in 1676, 10 years later, when he dies, now you've got a commandment-breaking, Muslim, dead Jewish Messiah. You would think that that would just be too much to swallow. I mean, really. And yet, the movement did not end then either. There continued to be people who were sure that he had simply occulted himself or that he was hidden somewhere. And this is a big tradition in the history of messiahs, this idea, right? And that he was coming back, right? Like some kind of Gabor sister, right? He's going to come back again and again. But the movement keeps going. And in fact, in some very odd forms, right? It continues in the Jewish world, and then there are a bunch of Jews, including leaders, including rabbis, major rabbis in the city of Saloniki and other places in the Ottoman Empire who in the 1680s converted en masse to Islam in imitation of Shabbatai Zevi. They become their own sect. They're called the Donmeh. They still exist. I've met some myself. They're still around. Are they Muslims? Maybe. Are they Jews? No, even though they're descended from Jews. I mean, technically, halachically, maybe. What are they? They're their own thing, right? So they exist. Then there's another whole group of people who followed a character named Jacob Frank, who was an 18th century Ukrainian wagon driver who had his own messianic persona, and without going into details, that was another whole movement that existed all the way through into the 19th century. And in fact, at least the memory of it lasted deep into the 19th century, almost to the 20th century. Just in case you were wondering, the answer is yes, Justice Brandeis did come from a family of Frankists. Justice Brandeis came from a family of followers of this man, Jacob Frank, and had a picture of the daughter of Jacob Frank on his desk. Okay, there's no particular reason I needed to tell you that, except that I just find that so amusing. Okay, so that is the movement. So let me spend 5 minutes now. Is that okay? Five minutes to try and say something about why would people have believed in this particular person, Shabbatai Zevi, what the theories are. And this is fairly complicated, and a lot of it requires a sort of an ability to put your head back 300 and 400 years ago into the way people were thinking then, which is almost impossible today, but right, we try. 100 years before this movement had been an enormous Kabbalistic movement, in the city of Safed, at Tzfat, in the Galilee. And I'm sure you've heard of some of the people involved in that movement. One of them was Rabbi Joseph Caro, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, which is still the standard code of Jewish law. One of them was the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, who was great creative Kabbalist, and there were others, Rabbi Moses Cordovero and Rabbi Moses Alsheikh, who wrote Lecha Dodi, which you might have run into at some point, this incredible group of Kabbalists in Tzfat, in the Galilee. And there was a lot of messianic expectation around that group as well. There were expectations for the year 1540 that the Messiah would come then, and then other expectations for the year 1575 the Messiah would come. And there were a lot of expectations that Rabbi Isaac Luria himself might be the Messiah, all kinds of things going on. And the whole thing sort of shut down without, as far as I know, without the Messiah coming, right? So Nathan of Gaza used a lot of the whole movement, this whole Sabbatean movement, used a lot of the language and the symbols and the material from the Safed circle to sort of couch their movement, right, in those terms which maybe people would recognize. So the great scholar of this movement, Gershom Sholem, asked the following question. He said, what could there be that would convince people all over the Jewish world, not just in some local area, but all over the Jewish world, to believe in this guy? It had to be something that was known all over the Jewish world and that spoke to people all over the Jewish world. And his claim was, everybody knew the Kabbalah, the mystical system of Rabbi Isaac Luria. And it was Lurianic Kabbalah, the mystical system of Rabbi Isaac Luria that Nathan of Gaza used here, and that is what convinced people. That's what brought people in. Lots of criticism of this theory. My teacher, Moshe Edel, pointed out, among other things, that, number one, very few people in 1665-66 actually knew very much about the Kabbalah of Rabbi Isaac Luria. They had heard of the man, they had heard the stories, but of the actual Kabbalistic system, probably very little was known in most places. Number two is that Shabbatai Zevi himself was a Kabbalist, but he wasn't that kind of Kabbalist. He was the kind of Kabbalist, of mystic, who liked the Zohar. It was an older book, right? And the books of the book of Pliya. There's certain books that he liked, but he was not into the new Lurianic Kabbalah of the 16th century. So how are you going to claim that the whole movement is based around that when the main figure wasn't interested in that kind of Kabbalah? So these are some major questions. There are various other questions about this theory. I guess another one is, how do you explain a mass movement within the Jewish world? It's a good bet that most Jews anywhere were at least prepared to believe that Shabbatai Zevi might be the Messiah. And many, many people who are very enthusiastic supporters. How do you explain that by claiming that a few Kabbalists, right? That's a very small group of people who really understand the mysteries of the Kabbalah, right? How does that explain this huge movement? So my claim is that it was the spectacle of prophecy. It was seeing the prophecy of Nathan of Gaza happening. It was seeing the prophets in their own communities that people watched falling over and prophesying and doing all kinds of things which you would think would be maybe physically impossible, as people do when they're falling into prophetic fits, right? That, I think, had a deep impact on people, and without going into details, I think that I can show that. I think I can show it from records of the period, that really got to people. It's embarrassing. We don't want to think that our ancestors would be hoodwinked by watching people going into prophetic prophecies, like watching Sunday morning evangelical television. But we know that happened all over the place. There were movements like this in England. Some people here live in some place called Shaker Heights, Shaker Boulevard, Shaker something. Who were the Shakers? Who were the Quakers? They were Civil War period and post-Civil War period English sects. That's S-E-C-T-S. I don't want to get in any trouble here, right? Who they this was the kind of thing they did. They fell over in ecstasies and in prophetic, right? They erased from the record, especially the Quakers don't want anybody to remember this, but this is what the movements looked like in their origins, right? There were movements like this in the Ottoman Empire, the Sufis, right? Dervishes. This was the kind of thing that they did. So these kinds of ecstasies and prophetic fits and things like this were around. And people took them very seriously. And as a spectacle, it is my conviction that this is what people saw that pulled them into the movement. And of course, once the movement gets started, if you're a fan of Malcolm Gladwell, as I am, right, and if you've read the book The Tipping Point, you know about how this works, right? Once a movement gets its own internal logic and gets going like a snowball, it really, the logic of it, the calculations, everything goes out the window, and it just builds on itself, which certainly is something that happened here. So that was what I wanted to tell you in a very brief version about the movement of Shabbatai Zevi and about what was behind it, perhaps. And I would be very happy to hear any questions or thoughts that people have about that.
Thank you so much. I'll go around with the mic. Thanks. I'll go around with the mic so when you ask a question that everyone can hear. I'll start in the back.
I want to know where all this came from, and I mean, how do we know so much? And is there any estimate of the percentage of Jews at the time who were affected by this, and the numbers?
Okay, great, excellent questions about this. So the first question is about sources. So it is interesting that Jewish communities ripped pages out of the communal registers that had information, we sent this much money to the Messiah, and things like this. They were terribly embarrassed afterwards, right? In other words, most people went back to their normal Jewish lives, and they destroyed a lot of evidence about it. But other people weren't destroying evidence. One of the big sources was a rather bitter, frustrated rabbi named Jacob Sasportas, who was living in Hamburg at the time, who was a very strong opponent of the movement, and he kept a collection of the letters that he exchanged with people all over the Jewish world about what was going on. That is a tremendous source. There were several Christians who were eyewitnesses to the events and kept detailed records of what they saw, including these lay prophetic outbreaks. There were Jews whose secret writings weren't destroyed and were kept in secret one place or the other. The Donme kept their own records, which until about the period of the First World War were in a sort of secret archive of theirs. So there is a surprisingly large amount of primary documentation about this, which remained at various places. Now, let me see. Your second question was, remind me? Yes, percentages, right? Or right. It's sort of like trying to figure out how many Jews were expelled from Spain in 1492. It's kind of a fool's errand in that we just we don't have enough, and that actually you have at least some records. Here you really have no way of knowing except from anecdotal evidence. The anecdotal evidence is very strong about this, that the unbelievers, the anti-Sabbatean group, was a minority almost everywhere. I hate to take too much time on one question, but I got to tell you this, okay? So when I was in yeshiva, they used to tell a story. That the son of a great Polish rabbi who's called the Taz, the Turei Zahav, that he sent his son and his son-in-law to the Ottoman Empire to check out Shabbatai Zevi and to see whether he might really be the Mashiach, the Messiah. And they get there, and they see him, according to one version of the story, he ties his left shoe before his right shoe, which is one of these tiny details of rabbinic tradition, right, that he did the wrong way. Another is that a version is that he was sleeping on his back, which again, the rabbis say you're not supposed to do, whatever. And they looked at that and they said, this guy is obviously not the Messiah, and they went home, and that was the end of the movement for Poland. This story is what you call an agada, right? It is, as far as I can tell, a completely fictional story, because we have every evidence that the movement was very popular in Poland, became enormously popular in the next generation, and already at that time, there was no evidence that somebody tried to put an end to it. And in the collection of Rabbi Jacob Sasportas's letters, he tells the story of the visit of the son and son-in-law of the Taz to Shabbatai Zevi. And he says they came, they were extremely impressed with Shabbatai Zevi. He gave them special gifts that seemed to indicate that he knew something that other people wouldn't know about their father, and so on. And he sent them away, and that when they got to Poland, that's when the movement took off in Poland. In other words, the polar opposite of the story that I heard in yeshiva. So people are embarrassed to this day about this movement. I got a call once from a lady named Lucia Laniado. She wrote a book called The Man in the White Sharkskin Suit. Maybe you've seen that. Great book. So she had noticed that an ancestor of hers from the Laniado family was a great supporter of Shabbatai Zevi. And she said to me, how could this be? My great rabbi ancestor, why would he? It's complicated. It's very complicated. But he was a supporter, and a huge number of rabbis and leading figures were supporters. So it's hard to nail down numbers, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I think that most Jews were at least open to the idea, and many, many were farbrenta, right, real deep believers.
I thought it was a terrific talk. The reference to Brandeis, which I think was only the Dembitz branch that was. But my question is, with what you've discussed, before I came here, I was thinking about these dates, and the Baal Shem Tov, 1701. The Shabbatai Zevi, 1648, and this movement, which really did extend everywhere. I remember there was in Livorno, Italy, there was a very big Shabbatai Zevi. Yes. But what I'm wondering about is and this is a scholar's type question for you. You're a scholar, right? Is there any evidence of causality between the messianic movement and the ultimate emergence, pretty far, not too far after, of the Hasidic movement?
So this is another, right, so the question is really about whether there was an impact of the Sabbatean movement on the Hasidic movement, which really occurred sort of in the next generation or two generations later. And the answer is that the scholars have been working on this question assiduously for several generations. This is a tremendous question, what you're asking. And the answer appears to be that the Baal Shem Tov, like many other leaders in his generation, was actively trying to distance himself from the Sabbateans. Remember, in Poland in his period, the Frankists, right, the followers of this character, Jacob Frank, were very active right in that period. And people have written about the relationship, which they're clearly, the Baal Shem Tov is in some cases reacting to what's going on with the Frankists. However, right, there are mystical impacts going on. And one of them is this. The Baal Shem Tov, in his writing, well, he didn't really write anything. And the things people wrote about him, about the things that he said, right, he would often talk about a figure who had been a Baal Shem preceding him, who had influenced him a great deal. And he refers to this person as Rav Adam Baal Shem. Adam the Baal Shem, Adam the mystic, right? It turns out that there are certain writings of this Adam Baal Shem which were preserved, and they are writings of a Sabbatean figure. They come out of Sabbatean circles. So the Baal Shem Tov was certainly an opponent of the Sabbateans, and yet sort of under the door into his movement come ideas which originated in Sabbatean circles. So without going further into it, is an excellent question, and that seems to be the situation.
What I've always had trouble understanding about messianic movements is, it's my understanding of the Jewish tradition that when the Messiah comes, certain things are to happen. And as best I know, none of these things happened during the timeline of these people who claimed to be messiahs.
This is the best set of questions I've ever gotten after a talk. This is incredible. So this is a key question, right? In other words, the Messiah is supposed to come and everybody's supposed to be redeemed, right? Like the blue chip stamps. Where are we, right? Where's the redemption? Where is it? So I would say, I don't have a definitive answer for this question, but I would say that our friend Jesus of Nazareth, our brother, our cousin, whatever he was, right? He, as in so many other areas, kind of created the mold by breaking his mission in two. Or maybe it wasn't him who created the mold, maybe it's his followers, right? Right? There's a first coming, and then there's a second coming, right? Oh, I didn't finish the mission the first time around. That's because I'm saving the rest of it for the second time around. And this idea that a Messiah will disappear for some period and reappear later in history is a motif all through the history of messianic movements and figures. In the case of Shabbatai Zevi, when he converts to Islam, his theologians, right, the ideologues of his movement, dig into not only Kabbalistic works, but also into works in the Bible, where it says things like that the Messiah, or what people think is referring to the Messiah, will be reviled, he'll be hated, everybody will reject him, and only after all that has happened will he be recognized and the redemption will come. And they say, that's what's going on here, right? For further questions really about how you can have a Messiah who didn't redeem everybody and died, but is still the Messiah, I would refer you to your local chapter of the Chabad movement. It seems to be very complicated, but it seems to have to do with a certain mindset of hope and expectation. And it's not just Jewish messiahs, it's the Christians, it's other people as well, Muslims.
The life in Poland in the 17th century was very hard for the Jews. So here is somebody who comes and he's represented as the savior. So it's not difficult to understand that people would follow this movement. It reminds me of the Golem of Prague. It was so difficult in Prague that the rabbi had to invent the golem to save the Jews.
So here are a couple of thoughts about this, the idea that it was terrible in Poland, and so it would be easy for them to believe in a Messiah, and comparing it to the golem. I love that. Here are a couple of things about the golem to start with. First of all, there is no evidence from the period of the Maharal of Prague that the golem story circulated at all and was ever attached to the Maharal. In fact, it seems to have been a story that was attached to another Baal Shem, who was the grandfather of the Chacham Tzvi Ashkenazi, because the Chacham Tzvi and his son, Rav Yaakov Emden, tell the story about their grandfather, that he created a golem. it's not only is it not associated in that period with the Maharal, who's the purported creator of the golem, but if you learn at all about the Kabbalah of the Maharal, it's just all the wrong kind of stuff. It's just not the kind of guy who would be creating a golem. So there's an issue about that. The other issue is that during the period of the Maharal, the life of the Jews in Prague was actually pretty good in general. Prague was one of the largest Jewish communities at that period, the end of the 16th century. The Maharal himself was invited to come talk to the Holy Roman Emperor, who's arguably the most powerful man in the world. He invited the Maharal because the Emperor Rudolf II, was fascinated by mysticism and science and occult ideas and so on. He invited the Maharal to come speak with him about these ideas. So that speaks of a fairly good relationship. So I'm not sure about the golem, but we could have a long conversation about the golem. It's a fascinating area. I wrote a screenplay if anybody's interested. But as far as the life for the Jews in Poland, so it is true, right? Let's say that you assume that messianic movements find fertile ground when there have been disasters. And there's a case to be made for that. So the question I would have is, but the movement only arrives in Poland sort of later. It starts out in a trading city, a wealthy trading city in the Ottoman Empire. And it's all focused at the beginning, and all the leadership is in the Middle East. So it's hard to explain the rise of the movement by things that are happening in Poland. Finally, and this is debatable, but the historian Jonathan Israel has made the claim that by 20 years later, after the Khmelnytsky events, Poland was already recovering very well, and that in fact, by the time this movement occurred, things were much better in Poland. Now, better is always relative, right? But that's another claim that somebody has made about that.
I'm just very curious, how old was he when he died, and does anyone know what he died from?
Died at 50 in 1676, so his dates are 1626 to 1676. He had been exiled. He kind of kept being a thorn in the side of the Ottoman authorities, and he was exiled to someplace deep in maybe Yugoslavia. I've forgotten. I used to know the exact place. And he kind of died in obscurity. I mean, 50 years old in the 17th century was considered a fairly normal age to die. So I don't know quite what it was that he died from, but that's when it was.
I want to follow up on the questions about how the movement took hold and spread, and the different approaches that scholars give to how it is that happened, how it is that people believed him. And I think that you sort of outlined two sort of general approaches. One by Gershom Shalom, who said, this was an intellectual. You know, he was keying in, Shabbatai Zevi was aware of what the intellectual frameworks were, of the Kabbalistic language, of the Kabbalistic symbolism, and he played into it. And you're saying, no, and maybe Moshe Idel also, I don't remember what he said, but you're saying, no, the masses weren't aware of this sort of intellectual framework, and that in fact, the reason why people believed it is because of this sort of physical, bodily spectacle that people saw. This falling on the ground, speaking in tongues, like very unusual, was like really compelling. And I guess it's sort of a personal question, and then maybe a kind of meta question about human nature. My understanding is that a lot of your work is intellectual history, and I'm sort of curious about how you make this bridge between work on intellectual history on the one hand, and yet sort of thinking about this bodily spectacles on the other. And then a sort of meta question is, you know, why do people believe in things that aren't true? Is it, it's on all of our minds now, you know, is it like I couldn't help it. But is it intellectually, like people believe intellectually, or is the spectacle just so overwhelming that people are convinced? I'll let you take that any direction you want.
That was a brilliant question, boy. Are we looking at the inventors of alternative facts here? I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I happen, as an academic, I have become absolutely convinced that ideas don't really move anything by themselves. That is not necessarily what a lot of people think, but I have worked on popular culture as well, and on sort of everyday thinking as opposed to intellectual thinking, and I tend to think that the powerful motivator in this case was not the theological treatises. Nobody even saw Nathan of Gaza's incredibly complex Kabbalistic treatises until many months after the movement was already going full speed. So there's good reason not to, to think that that was not what was motivating it. And there is also good reason to think that Sholem, I mean, you have to sort of, and I'm sure if you take courses here on a regular basis, you know this, but the Germans loved complicated intellectual stories, right? These sort of, the epochs of creativity and all these things. They hated when the Nazis used them, and yet it crept into Jewish thought as much as anything else. And Sholem thought in those terms, the epochal, grand stage of history sort of terms. And that's the way he couched this movement, right, as this sort of grand intellectual piece of this giant puzzle of Jewish history. And, I'm going, well, it's these little guys who are impressed by something that it's embarrassing for us to admit that they were impressed, but that's the way it was. I think that has to do with it, too.
Okay, I'll take about 2 more, and then we'll call it a night.
You have to get to the doctor and back.
Oh, to the doctor and back. Okay, I'm gonna go.
Jeffrey. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. That wasn't supposed to happen.
Okay.
Hi, welcome back to Cleveland. I'm wondering if there's been, if you could spend a minute or two talking about the Emden-Eibeshitz controversy and whether historians have decided whether Rabbi Eibeshitz was indeed a Sabbatean.
Okay, so there was a controversy in the 18th century between 2 of the greatest rabbis of that period, Rabbi Jacob Emden and Rabbi Jonathan Eibeshitz, who Emden claimed that Eibeshitz was a secret Sabbatean, a secret follower. Again, never ever tell my rabbi that you heard this from me, but he was right. Okay. And the people who are the most knowledgeable about this movement, the main one right now is Pavel Macheko, who's just moved from the Hebrew University to, what's the one in Baltimore? Johns Hopkins, right? He's written a book called The Mixed Multitude, which is sort of the book right now on Frankism, and he is extremely clear that Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz was a Sabbatean, and in fact, he recently published the text of this fascinating and disgusting book called Va'avo Hayom El Ha'ayin. I won't go into it, but clearly Eibeshitz. Even Shner Lyman, who is a great rabbinic scholar and has written about this movement, will not go on the record because he would be probably excommunicated or something if he actually came out and said this. But I'm fairly sure that he also thinks that Rabbi Jonathan Eibeshitz was a Sabbatean. So it's just, this is again a type of thing where it's embarrassing for the community to this day to admit that some rabbi or another was a follower of the movement, but clearly some major figures were followers, and this is another example.
I have 2 observations and 1 question. When it talked about Jesus setting the mold for the Messiah who's hidden and will come back, that exists outside of Jewish culture. I remember as a kid seeing this movie, Viva Zapata, and in the end they kill Zapata, and the peasants are saying, "Oh no, he really, oh no, he's really not dead. He's gonna come back. He's gonna come back." The other thing is about that ideas don't influence people.
I don't want to say they don't influence people.
No, but they're not as powerful. In the last election, the Democrat candidate said, "We're going to do this and we're going to do that." When the Republican candidate said, "No, we're not going to help anybody. We're going to build a wall or whatever." And the other thing I wanted to ask you about is That mystical song you alluded to, Istanbul was once Constantinople. That was brought out before a lot of people here. Was that invented?
Right. So the song is the song. Right. I know there's a song about Constantinople and Istanbul. That was the song. As far as, 1 second, you started with, just remind me, your first question? Oh, right. About coming back. Right. There is, in fact, in the study of religion, a very famous book by a guy named Mircea Eliade, who is one of the great scholars of religion, called The Myth of the Eternal Return, in which he points out that this is almost a human, it's almost a model that's found in all kinds of societies, this idea of coming back to what once was. So it's in Viva Zapata, it's in Jesus, it's the Muslims have their own version, it's all over the place. So you're absolutely right. It is all kinds of places besides Jewish culture, but if you're in the Jewish community, you know that we love claiming that it was our invention. So I'll leave it with that. Right.
Thank you so much.